Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine so that you can have a go, create this and amaze yourself. Okay, so as I explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn about the painting process and techniques as well as about the app I'm using, Procreate. But that isn't to say you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. In terms of the color profile, I'm using their default sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1 here on the list. Also, I'm using their default brushes, which would be, in this case, the inking, studio pen, the drawing, evolve brush, the airbrushing soft, medium, and medium hard brush, and the organic rainforest brush, and also the snow gum brush. In terms of the colors, I've already pre-selected a color palette here. Each of these colors has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. Each of these codes is listed down in the video description, so you just need to copy and paste them one at a time into this box, press enter, the color will appear up here, and then you can tap it into a blank palette for yourself. Or alternatively, next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel and gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of many of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really does make a massive difference and really helps me continue going as a channel. So thank you so much. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is rotate my canvas into the portrait orientation. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the first color on the top row, and I'm just going to drag into the canvas the flood fill. Now it's a very dark color, but we're not going to live with that color for very long. Now I'm going to go to my brushes. I'm going to use within organic, the rainforest brush. If I tap on that brush, within stroke path, I'm going to change the spacing to 40%. And click done. I'm going to go to my colors. Tap on the color circle. I'm going to go to the second color on the top row. I'm going to put the brush size 3% and 100% opacity. And then I'm just going to start tapping in some texture. It's going to be quite subtle, this. It's going to be background for the most part. But I'm just going to start tapping it in kind of clusters, clumps. Maybe you've got a tree over here, tree over there. I might even put it up a little bit more just to speed this up. Top end of 3%. Sometimes there's quite a lot of variation, even within the 1% on the slider. We're just adding some areas here, leaving some gaps. Definitely want some of that dark color to still remain, so don't add too much of this texture. Just creating intermittent amounts of it. Hopefully you can see that. It's quite a subtle change, but hopefully on camera. Another note that my camera will slightly distort the colors, so don't worry too much if your colors look a little bit different. Just move down. You can bring these down, maybe just let it separate a little bit more as it comes further down. We don't really want to take it beyond about halfway, something like this. I might just, around the halfway point, do a line all the way across, hold it until it snaps. And if you've gone a little bit wonky, you don't think it's horizontal, we'll just move it so it completely is not horizontal. Other hand, put a finger down, and then it should snap automatically to that perfect horizontal line. And that's roughly about halfway, maybe a little bit lower, but roughly. And then along the ground level, imagine some bushes, just run along there, just circle them in. Not something you need to agonize over. Don't spend a long time on that, like that. Go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 2. Go to my colors, third color. Same setting, same brush, it's just a note different. Don't need to really do a lot of this either. Just tapping it in for some variation. Again, this isn't very different. It's just, sometimes you can have things that are too monotonous, too monochromatic, with not enough variation, and just a subtle change of tone and of hue just helps stop it looking too flat. Create a new layer, layer 3. I'm going to switch to the evolve brush. Tap on the evolve brush, go to stroke path. The spacing is at 45%. Click done. I'm going to go in with a different color. So we'll go to the force color, force green. Go to the color disc, you can see exactly where it is. It's quite a grayed out version of quite a vibrant green, really. Then I'm going to put it to 6% size, 100% opacity. We can always subdue it. Then I just want some elements in this texture. I'll zoom in a bit, maybe towards the top section. We can always go in and subdue this as well. Maybe even turn it up a little bit more. Let's be a bit bolder. It is pressure sensitive, so if you press lightly, you're going to get smaller shapes in this texture. You press on a bit more, you get bigger amounts, bigger forms. Perhaps we just want some of that light in the top section, not too much. Very up the tap, so you got some really firm and then some lighter. We can go in here and subdue some of these as well, so don't worry too much. We've got it 100%, but it is on a separate layer, so we can amend it. Some across that center area just a little bit. We're now preserving this mainly for the upper area for the most part. Bring it down a little bit, but not too much. Then I'm going to perhaps just go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, just blur that in, maybe 3%, deselect. And I'm going to go to, that layer, tap on the layer, put on the alpha lock. And I'm going to go backwards to a slightly darker color, the third color. And I'll stay with the evolve brush, but we'll turn that percentage down to about 50. And then we can use this now to just start to chip away at some of that green, break it down a little bit so it starts to blend in a little bit more with that background. It's a bit brash, a bit jarring, so by doing this we're just sort of subduing it slightly, breaking down that texture a little bit, blending it in with some of the other greens and the dark scene generally. So you can just scribble it in, tap it in, however you prefer. A mixture of both is probably best. Same in that upper area. Don't really want any of that green to be completely flat, so we'll break it down, break it into more texture that way. Might even go to that whole layer, tap on the end, just dial it back. It's not as prominent, maybe to about 60% on the slider, like that. For the most part, that is going to be obscured anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the 6 color along, and I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium hard brush. Puts it maybe at the top end of 2%, 60% strength. And then we've got this central area where we can start to add in. I'll zoom in a bit more. Maybe we've got some stones there in the background. In fact, I might just turn that up to 100%. Just makes it easier in the first instance. But do bear in mind it's also pressure sensitive, so even at 100% you can press very lightly or you can really go for it. So it just depends on pressure really, but at least now with 100% you've got the option of really pressing on, getting the full opacity. We'll just create a collection of shapes in that background area. Maybe it just goes up. We're going to obscure this again with a little structure. Maybe there's some stones that meander up. Just right in the very center. And then we're getting a flattening. Again, this is all on that kind of middle line. Flatten it out a little bit either side. And just some round shapes. So there's some stones along here, and then some stones that almost, you can imagine, going off into the denser sort of greenery. Maybe it's a little path, maybe some steps. It doesn't need to be really spelt out. It's going to be obscured in that bit anyway. Just get a sense of it peeking through eventually. Some bigger stone shapes. Again, all along that middle line. Something like this. Zoom out. And then we're going to have a path that comes all the way to us in these bottom corners, pretty much. It doesn't, I wouldn't make it to the actual corner. It's going to be a little bit strange if it does that. Maybe just a bit upwards. There. This is the center of where it's heading to, but we don't want it to be that narrow when it hits there, so we're going to make it a little bit wider there and there. And then just as a guideline, we can do a line from there to there, and it doesn't need to be a straight line, so you don't need to hold it until it snaps to an absolute straight line at all. And then still with the 6 color, still with the medium hard brush, with an airbrushing, 5% size this time, 100% opacity. And I'm only pressing lightly, but I'm just starting to build up a sense of this path, and I probably want to keep it relatively dark, so I'm not pressing on too much at all. I just want to get a sense of it just blotted in to begin with. It does not need to be neat, because we're going to go in and we're going to create some stones on top anyway, so something like this. What appears quite light on a dark background for now. When we start adding some lighter stones over the top, this is actually going to appear a much darker colour underneath. That helps us understand the direction of everything that we're adding on top. So we will create a new layer above that, layer 5. We'll stay with the medium hard brush, but we'll turn it down to 2%, size, maybe not 100, maybe 80% strength. I'm going to zoom it to the side, and I'm going to start applying just some taps, some dashes, all kind of collect together. And I won't want them being neatly applied at all. I want to keep them kind of relatively randomly placed like this. You're just starting to get a sense of that movement then. Maybe I'll turn it down a little bit more, really low on the 2%. Do some more. And it's important perhaps to leave some gaps between these. So we're going to start noticing some little black, well, not really black because this is the background color behind it, but darker sections that just start to show through, especially as it gets closer to us. Again, doesn't need to be overly neat. Try to create them a little bit more randomly than that. So you have a shorter one, another one. You don't want a neat kind of brick pattern necessarily. These stones are going to be a little bit more haphazard than that. But what you don't want is them all kind of neatly lined up like this. That actually won't work very well. So try to have them, you notice there's a gap there, try to have one that cuts across. It's almost like a brick pattern, but don't stick too uniformly. If you're not sure what I mean by a brick pattern, then typically one brick would go in the middle of where the gap is, and another one would line up, the middle of the brick would line up with the gap of the previous one, and then you start another layer, and then it would do the same here. The middle would line up with the gap. We don't want that exactly, but you can bear that in mind. So it's a combination. You don't want them all completely lined up. You don't need to worry. It doesn't need to be exactly like a brick pattern as well. As it comes closer to us, some of these shapes are going to get a little bit bigger, not all of a sudden. Again, a little bit random. Might have some that are big next to a smaller shape. Keep zooming out, keep checking the impact of that. Is it working? Do you like it? You might not at this stage, and that's okay sometimes. Sometimes you just got to stick with it, see the process through, and things start to gel together as you go along. I might be looking at my version and not quite seeing how it's going to come together yet, and that's part of the process. Just don't worry about it. We'll get there. Zoom out, you can start to see this effect. And what I'm typically doing now is, rather than having shallow, narrow things like that, I'm making them a little bit deeper now. They're getting closer to us. I'm trying to keep them relatively random, not uniform. This has been requested many times over the years, and finally I'm super excited to tell you about a course that I've been working on quietly in the background. So you're probably used to my step-by-step tutorials that usually come in at less than an hour, but in this upcoming course I'm able to really dig deeper than usual and break the lessons down into not only the landscape fundamentals, but also finer detail, as well as more depth with tree shapes, textures, colour theory, and lots more. So you can be one of the first people to get notified when it's released. There is a link in the video description here. Click that link, join the waiting list, secure your spot, and get an exclusive discount when registrations open. I can't wait to tell you more about it. Very excited. More coming soon. Definitely getting broader, getting bigger now as they get closer to us. I don't want these gaps to be big. If there's any uniformity to this at all, it's that the gaps are always going to remain quite thin. So if there's ended up with an area there where the gap is just getting too big, you can go in and just narrow that gap. You've just got a little thin gap between all of these shapes. As soon as you start having big gaps like this, then you've got a problem, I think. I think it needs to be consistently narrow, even though the shape and the size of some of these stones will vary. I think that the gap between them always needs to be consistently narrow. You've got to think whoever's built this path, little bridge, has understood how to put it together with the available resources, stones that they've had, but they've put it together so that they all slot together quite neatly. We want to create a kind of really old, almost ancient kind of look to this. Things last a long time, then they're usually well put together. Again, zoom out, check that we're getting that perspective. They're getting bigger and bigger as they get closer to us. These are all just one color initially, but we can go in there with a couple of techniques. We can tap on it and we can use the alpha lock, create that checkerboard, go in with a different color, go over the top, and you can see it will just color in the stones, but not the gaps, which is perfect for what we need. But we're not doing that yet, so let's turn back off the alpha lock, continue with the process all the way until it hits us right in the foreground. Right, let's go back to that color change, so back to the 6th color. Let's get the rest of these stones in. Now we're also going to add things on the ground, maybe leaves. We've got a real fall or autumn kind of look to this one as well. Probably the last of the fall autumn landscapes that I'm going to do for this year. Not quite ready to give up on it yet. I guess we've got winter ones to look forward to next. As much as I'm looking forward to doing those, I just wanted to do another fall autumn scene. I do think that they're really stunningly beautiful in terms of their look and colours. I do love this time of year, so I just wanted to get one more. We're still in November after all. Well, at the time of creating and releasing this, we are anyway. Having said that, I don't think you need to be restricted to painting scenes that are in the season you happen to be in. I think you can do this any time of year. So if you're watching this in somewhere that perhaps doesn't have the same seasons, or it's actually a different season currently for you now, then don't let that put you off. You can enjoy doing it anyway. Certainly in the middle of winter, when in the UK, when we don't get as much good weather, I like looking at sunny landscapes. Almost like a wishful thinking, but I think autumn, fall has a particular beauty to it that is kind of interesting all year round anyway. Okay, so we're nearly there now. You can start to see that perspective effect. I've been doing them gradually bigger as they get closer to us. Now, alternatively to this, I suppose we could have just blotted this in. We could have just done a big shape, and then we could have gone in with something like the eraser. We could have just, create some gaps like this between the stones. And that's another option. I'm not discounting that at all. But sometimes that's quite a tricky thing to achieve as well for some people. So this is, a mixture between the two. We might go back in and do that in addition to what we've already done. There's definitely nothing wrong with either approach. And the other approach is probably faster than the way I've been showing you, but I think sometimes actually putting them in as blocks helps you really understand them as separate shapes. You can go back in and you can tidy these up, create nice sharp edges for them. If you really want to, after a certain point, I guess you can do that. You can just put it to 100%, block this in, try out a couple of different techniques for this. So maybe do it this way, plot it in. If you're confident enough to do it this way, go in with the eraser. We'll get the eraser too. I'll put the eraser to something like the medium brush with an airbrushing. I'll put that maybe a 1% size, maybe not quite 100, maybe 70% opacity. And then we can go in there and we can put in these shapes. If you feel confident doing it this method, then feel free. It's probably ultimately a bit quicker because you're just adding the lines. Not everyone's going to find it as straightforward this way. Whatever works better for you. You can really vary up the angle of some of these shapes. They don't all need to be, once you've got those placed in, we might go over with a bigger brush just to firm up some of these shapes, just make them a bit more distinct. So we'll maybe turn that up a little bit, 2%, and then we'll go in, vary up some of the gap. Two completely different methods for achieving basically the same kind of look, whichever you prefer. Have any qualms with that, whatever you think suits your approach best. So there we've got a general sense of the path. I'm going to go in, maybe create a new layer for this, tap on the new layer 5 and put on the clipping mask. That creates a little arrow which links it to layer 4, which means that anything I add to layer 5, and I'll demonstrate it with the bright color, it will only color in any details that are actually linked to the layer underneath. And if I remove the layer underneath, it also removes anything I do on layer 5. But that's not exactly what I want to do, so I shall clear that. Keep the clipping mask on though. I'll go in with a soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go to a lighter color, so I'm going to go to the 7th color on the top row. I'm going to turn that soft brush down, 2% size, maybe 50% strength, and just retreated back from the very top. I'm going to do some light colors coming through. We're going to have bands where the sun just falls through. We're going to have trees that obscure the sun, and then we're going to have bits that, shadows remain a bit more. So now going along these and keeping it a little bit haphazard again, brightening up these stones. Maybe turn it up 3%, pressing lightly again. We're creating bands, we're creating a bit more variety. This helps, stops them looking too flat. Okay, we'll come back to that path. For now, I'm going to leave that there. We're going to add a little structure in this area, just so it pulls it all together a little bit better. We're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer, layer 6. Go to our colors. We're going to use the 4th color on the middle row. We're going to go in with the medium hard brush again, within airbrushing. 2% size, 100% opacity. I'm just going to zoom into this top area. I'm going to do a rectangle. Hold it until it snaps. It's not going to be perfect, so let's go here. Let's change it to a rectangle. We probably need to rotate it as well. Go to the transform. Oops. Just rotate it until you think it's a bit more horizontal. I'm going to flood fill that shape. So drag from the color into the shape and it flood fills it. A little bit dark at the minute. You'll see it more later when we start adding some bright colors. Hopefully you can still see it enough. Go to the transform. Go on the freeform. And I'm going to pinch it from the left corner. You have to hold it. And it should pinch in. Do the same from the other corner. Try to make it symmetrical. And then we'll pull from not the green circle, the little blue circle at the top. And squash it down. And trying to judge it by eye. It might be a little bit off. Do as best you can to judge it. Deselect once you've got this kind of a shape. Now I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go to the 6th color on the top row. Stay with the medium brush, medium hard brush with an airbrushing. 1% size, 100% opacity. And then just along that very top, we're going to do a collection of separate tiles that are all lined up. They'll essentially form one line all the way across. We are going to do it as little separate dashes, even if they ultimately pretty much connect all the way across. I think it's important to do them as separate little shapes anyway. Gives them more texture. So the sun is pouring in, it's just illuminating that bit. Then we're going to go in with the eraser. So the eraser to the medium hard brush as well. 1% size, 100% opacity, and zoom into the corner so you can see it. And we're just going to remove that way a little bit. And then we're going to angle it, remove this way a little bit. Hopefully you can just about make that out on camera. I appreciate it's a little bit dark. But then from this corner, you've just indented it a little bit. We're going to take it all the way down. You should be able to see that enough. Hold it till it snaps. And then as long as that doesn't get wider compared to there, then you're good to remove a whole section. And then just delete that, or erase that rather. And again, we've just indented it a bit. Pull it all the way down. Hold it till it snaps. Then you create a little stripe that then you can just erase like that. Back to the brush. Then what we can do is we go to that layer, turn off the alpha lock for a moment, go to this line, and just from this point, have some dashes, perhaps run down. Maybe we should have done that along that top line. We can go in and fix that. Let's turn that brush size down, lower on that 1%. And then just from that edge, we're going to create a little bit that kind of almost joins it up like this. Band that just almost but lightly presses and joins here. And then again, we repeat that process. We want these pretty much to be joined up. We don't want the gaps to be that apparent, so you can go over and just lightly get rid of that gap if it's too much. It needs to be essentially straight lines, like so. Now it's at this point you notice whether your shape looks symmetrical or not. If it isn't looking symmetrical, well, do you know what? It's quite easy to fix. You can go back to the transform, freeform, and from the bottom corner, wherever you need to amend it, and my bottom right corner, press it and just kick it out there a little bit more until I'm happier with it. That works a bit better. I'm going to go along this top edge, and I did it with the alpha lock on, so we've got a really straight line there at the top, which is fine, but I'm just going to create little bits where they almost jut up, so then you get this little up and down sense. Just make them look like they're actually constructed out of little pieces, little tiles that are all wood that's all stacked together, whatever the material is, like so. And this is actually a little overhang, so it's going to cast a shadow. But then we're going to get straight back to the sun again. And then in here, we could draw a line, probably all the way across to this side. Again, hold it till it snaps. We don't want that to be completely perfect either. So let's just go along there. And although we've snapped it to an absolute straight line, we can slightly untidy it too. I'm doing a band, a stripe of that all the way across. Let's just put up a hint more on that 1%. And then we're going to have another band across here. And this, again, might be an example where perhaps we could just go down, blot this in, and then we'll actually add the stripes this time rather than doing it as separate shapes. Let's try that method. Just join this in. And I'm doing it as freehand best that I can, like this. A slightly more organic look to it. And then, well, let's blot this in, like I was saying. Could just flood fill, I suppose. Speeds things up, but you can see that is a bit too sensitive, so we'll try that again. Hold it, slide it back so it only fills in the section we want. And then anything that we need to, we can just go in and amend any little anomalies that we didn't intend. Easy enough to remove, like so. So I'm going to go back to the fourth color, still with the medium brush, 1% size, 100% opacity, and then, as I was saying, we're now going to introduce some of these stripe that cuts across this way instead. And we could perhaps go to the fifth color. Maybe we'll do it that color first. It's a warmer, not quite as absolute dark. You can use a combination of the two anyway. Take your time to get this right. This is the tricky bit. Every conversation you can do it. You can always hold it until it snaps to a straight line, and you can start it that way. It's quicker. Hold it. Hold it. And if it's going to go wrong, then at least it's going to go wrong more quickly, and you can then address it. Like this. And you could always go in with the smudge. So smudge to the airbrushing, or airbrushing medium hard brush. And you can always put it to maybe 2% size, 100% opacity. And you could always just make that line slightly less regular. Doesn't need to be perfect. Just go along it. Those lines, make them slightly less absolute. That helps. Back to the brush. I'll go to the soft brush with an airbrushing. Put it a bit bigger, maybe 3% size, 15% strength, and let's just vary up the whole area. Make it slightly less absolutely bright. That works. Back to the fourth color. Go back to the medium hard brush. 1% size, 100% opacity, and then we can zoom in again. Maybe it just gets to the edges. We just need to define the separation here. Just a hint more. It ties into that edge. And then, well, I guess we can have some separation in these as well. Maybe we are better off with the fifth color for this. You can have some maybe bits that the shadow, maybe they just recessed, they kind of tucked in there a little bit more, and they create a broader shadow in some areas. Maybe that shadow can just be varying in thickness in certain places, just so it doesn't look too rigid and uniform. I want to make it look more hand constructed rather than absolutely perfect. We can just introduce some more vertical lines. I don't want them to be uniform either. Just a smattering of them, just a suggestion of them almost here and there. I'm pressing lightly, and I'm really not taking much care with that. I just want to almost just suggest them really rather than clearly defining them. Just cut across, do some faint suggestions of that. And we're working with the angle a little bit. Get one or two that are just a bit bolder perhaps, but I'd be wary of making this too distinct. Just going to randomly introduce these all the way. It's pretty random. I'm not creating that, like I was saying before, that brick formation. I'm trying to avoid that too much. And then for the bottom edge, Oh, it was a bit too strong. Let's take that off. Easy to overdo these. Okay, so when you zoomed out, I think that effect is generally working quite nicely. Still with the fifth color. Underneath here, perhaps we need to have, still in the shadow, perhaps just slight definition. So for each of these, we can just go and create a hint. Again, that's maybe getting too bright. Let's dial that back. We've got it 100%. Maybe we should put it down to maybe 40% strength. Again, it is pressure sensitive, so it also depends on how you press. Just add in that shadow a bit more definition. Come down to this area, and then I'm going to do a line that cuts across just underneath. Now we've got the roof to our little structure in place. Okay, so from layer 6, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 7, but I'm going to put it underneath layer 6. Now, by default, it is attached itself to layer 5 and layer 4. You can see the little arrow. So just to make sure that we don't use that, tap on it and put on, or off rather, the clipping mask. I'm going in with the medium hard brush with an airbrushing still, and I'm going to the fourth color on the middle row, higher up on the 2% size and 100% opacity, and then just underneath this, and you're not going to see it very clearly, but just enough. Hopefully it's clear on camera. We'll do a band of this across, one side to the other, and just rotate it back. I want the legs to join up with the width of the path. Now, if yours is completely the wrong size for this, then you could always go back to layer 6 and just resize it, but mine is sized so that I now can bring legs from the path up to join this structure. Now, like I say, if you have misjudged this, or it doesn't quite fit at this point, then you can always just transform that top layer. And if you're not sure what I mean by that, tap on the layer, transform, and if you put it on freeform, you can squash it, you can bring it further down, you can rearrange it however suits it best. Well, mine seems to be pretty well lined up, so back to layer 7, and we'll do a beam that cuts across from here to here. Hold it, maybe double that up a little bit, put that down on that size, 1%, 100% opacity still, and we'll just flatten that bottom edge, right keys into the ground, same here, square this off at the edges. You're not going to be able to see it very clearly, it is an important part of it. Tap on the layer and put on the alpha lock now at this point. We'll go back to a brighter color, so we'll go to the fifth color, still with the same brush, 1% size, but we're going to turn it down to maybe 20% strength. And then we'll start introducing a bit more clarity, and it doesn't need to be particularly clear, but I want to start noticing these a little bit. So I'm just going to run highlight up and down here. Now on this side, the sun's not really going to hit it, but it doesn't mean we're not going to see any definition. So we'll just run a couple of lines up here, one at the very edge maybe, cuts up, and a line down the middle. We just want to create a little sense that we've got wood beams that aren't all one color or one tone. And we can just go turn it on its side. Maybe just the bottom of that beam is just going to catch some light from somewhere, probably from the path. We're going to add a real brightness of sun bursting on that path, so I guess it can reflect some of the light up again as well. You can start to see the structure a bit better that way. And then maybe underneath here, you can just add some dashes that cut across. You've just got some extra structure underneath there. Doesn't need to be overly spelt out, just some dashes, sense of things that cut across, just so it doesn't look too flat. Maybe a little light across the top of there, light that cuts, just hits the side of it there as well. The light is typically coming from this side in this image. And then we'll go to the brightest, the 6th color. Maybe just the bottom edge. Sunlight is just creeping in here, just impacting just on this edge a little bit. Maybe turn that down even more. 1%, 45% or so. And it is pressure sensitive, like I said before, so it's not all about the percentage, it's about the way that you use it too. It's just highlighting that bottom section. We'll probably come back to that. We can see it more clearly when we add other details, so we'll move along to another area. So now that we've got our little structure, we'll go to our layers, top layer, create a new layer on top. Now we've got background foliage, but I'm going to start adding some more middle area foliage into the scene. So I'm going to go to the artistic. So I'm going to go to the drawing evolve brush, tap on it, still at 45% spacing, done. I'm going to go to the 5th color on the bottom row. I'm going to put it probably 10% size, 50% strength, and zoom out. And then we're going to have, I did say that we're going to obscure much of this now, so this is the point where we're doing that. So we needn't need to worry too much about that background green area. We're going to have some foliage coming in now, and it's important is at that lower percentage, because the more you tap it and it overlaps, it puts in some of this texture for us really quite nicely. And actually I want that foliage to go behind this structure, so I'm going to drag it underneath layer 6, and that way I can more freely just apply it, not worry at that juncture where it meets it. I'm going to bring it all over to this side. We're probably going to have it obscured by even more foreground trees, but still put it in there anyway. Another tree in here, just circle it in initially. It's at the edges really where you have to just be a little bit more discerning, a bit more careful. And then, well, I may as well just blot most of that out actually. I'm fine with that. Go over it a couple of times, circle it in. Maybe down in this area a little bit, create some shapes, just circle it in. If you do it in one pressure and then lift up and do it again, you're going to get nice variation. Something like this. And that already is starting to make much more sense of the scene. I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in slightly, maybe about 3%, deselect. I'm going to tap on the layer, put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go back to my colors. I'm going to move along to the 6th color, still with the same brush. Turn it down slightly, 6%, stay at the 50% strength. And now this will apply it. In fact, let's turn it down even more. Let's go for 4%. This will start to apply this texture now within the confines of the shapes we've already created. Now it is at a low opacity because we only applied it at a relatively low opacity anyway with that initial layer, and it is now linked to it or alpha locked in that area. So it's not a full opacity at all. So although it might be of quite a strong color, it's not allowing us to apply it in a particularly vivid way. It's just ramping it up piece by piece and just scribbling it in, leaving some of the gaps of that slightly darker color showing through. Think about where the sun is coming from. I imagine the sun coming from up here. So the top edge, we're going to add more of the highlights. Probably need to do that on a separate layer in a moment, and that's fine. These are just some of the shadow colors. So we'll go again to our layers. So from layer 8, we'll create a new layer above that, layer 9. Again, it's underneath the wood structure roof. I'm going to stay with the evolved brush. I'm going to stay with the 6th color on the bottom row. I'm going to put it down even further, 3% size, 50% strength. But because it's not attached to a layer with alpha lock where I hadn't gone full opacity, I can now start to really ramp this up a little bit more. I can press on more, get bigger versions of that texture, and just push that a little bit further. In fact, I need to be a little bit higher. Let's go to the 4% again. And it is pressure sensitive, so you can press on lightly and get smaller shapes. And I think that's a good thing to do. Around the edges, just tap in smaller shapes for leaves that are just sticking out. And then when we get to the bulk of the tree, we can press on a bit more, get some blocks. We can also change to the next color, the 7th color. And we can do the similar again. So we're getting some really vibrant highlights in here as well. Tap it in. Whenever you want a larger block, you can just scribble it in, press harder. But certainly around the edges, when we're going to get that kind of natural fragmentation of the leaves on that real edge, then tap more lightly. It's going to be useful. So we can alternate between that yellow and the 6th color, more of an orange. Use them both. We've got a nice underpinning of more muted shadow area. That means we can go over, bring out some details on the top, over the top of it rather. And again, some of these tree details are actually going to be obscured once more, once we start adding even more close to trees, close to foliage. But it's a pretty good starting point. Got another color, maybe the 8th color on the bottom row. That's a nice color. 5% size. Let's just really go for the strength of it a little bit more, 80%. I should get some variation of different tones in this section. Although we're going to have trees that cut in front. Quite nice to vary it up. We'll go back to the lighter colors. So we'll go back to the 7th color. Again, the light is coming from that top edge. Even if we're going to do trees that obscure this, like maybe have like a silhouette foliage that cuts in front, we'll create the background with light initially. And then if just little bits of it peek through, then that can be really nice. And that's worth doing then. Let's create some chunks, leave some gaps. The gaps are just as important sometimes. And then back to the 7th color. Maybe we should turn the opacity down for the 7th color to the 50%. It's such a bright yellow. We just need to be a bit more controlled, a bit more subtle with its application. And with this, we're just going to tap it in. It is now at the 5%. Tap it in. So I'll put it up a little bit, 7%. Just tap it in a bit more. Again, preference this top area. The sun is coming in from that side. So a bit more at this top edge. Back a color. Where were we? Back to the 6th color. Perhaps we could even go in some more kind of red colors. So maybe something like the 3rd color on the bottom row. And we could really get some of those autumnal variations in there as well. It comes further down. And it goes behind the hut. I don't want to do too much of that actually. Maybe just down in these lower sections. It's quite a warm colour. I want to keep most of the warm colours for the more foreground foliage. I want it to be a little bit more muted back there, but we're mixing it in with quite muted colours anyway, so I'm not worrying about it. It's really just a hodgepodge of different textures back there, but it's going to be cut in front of anyway, so that's all good. Okay, so most of that's on one layer. We'll just go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and then we'll slide that across, maybe 2%, deselect. We'll tap on that layer and we'll merge down. So all of the foliage for that bright warm foliage is now on one layer, which I think will work better for us. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, but we're going to go to the very top and do it from there. Layer 9 now. I'm going to start introducing some more rocks in that distant area. I'm going to go in with a 3rd color on the middle row, and I'm going to go in with the organic rainforest brush. Again, the spacing is still at 40% there. 2% size, maybe 80% strength. And we'll just build in some foliage of this green here at the side, perhaps. Just suggestions of it. And then maybe go to the 2nd color on the middle row, create some more, put it up 3%, more ground level bushes and things that go off in these different areas. Just be mindful as we get close to that structure. Take this color over this side. Again, just stay clear of this structure. Don't really want to interfere with that. I'm going to go to the 1st color on the middle row, and there's some rocks that are here. So I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium hard brush, 2% size, 100% opacity, and I'm just going to make a bit more of a feature of these rocks. So I want them to jut down in this area, maybe join in or hit like a water that's going underneath our little bridge. Let's blot this in. And this is very much like the shadow part of it. And although it doesn't look very shadowy at this stage, that's because we haven't added any kind of real strong sunlight to the scene yet. So we'll just put that in to begin with. And then we can go to a really bright color. So the 10th color on the middle row, still the same brush, 1% size, 100% opacity. And the sun's coming in from here. And you can see the band that cuts in front of that building structure. And then we can just create some highlights on what would be the top of this rock, create some kind of rounded shapes. And it can go all the way back here to a point as well. Pick out the top edge of some rocks that are just settled in this area, maybe on the ground too. Doesn't have to go all the way back. We're getting more shadow areas a little bit further back there as well. Maybe we could also go to a dark color. So maybe the 1st color on the top row. And then we could introduce some splits maybe in the rock where it's just breaking up a little bit. So we've added highlights. We should perhaps go in and add some separation of some of these forms as well. As it gets down towards the water, it just starts to perhaps chip away at that. So you get almost like a shadow on the bottom section of that rock. Again, just separate it out a little bit, some splits, some lines that jut down towards that water. fragment it up a little bit more, something like this. We can then go back to the first color again, turn the strength of that down to maybe 50%. Then we can have another suggestion of a rock back here as well. Just blot it in and then go over it again for the top edge, or just create some variation. Go over it a few times. Another rock, maybe another one in here, just hinted at. We're already getting a sense of that kind of landscape quite nicely. We can come over to this side and do more. Just circle in a nice big shape. Because it's at 50% opacity, we can go over it again and going to create some variation in that color. Create some kind of forms, some shapes to it already. Add some back here. Boulders, kind of round shape. Might want to put this back up again, actually 2% size. Just a cluster of shapes initially before we define them. We can go back into that background, add some of that color to some of these as well. Maybe some bigger shapes, 3%, big shape here. And it could be kind of rough initially, and then over here, perhaps some big shapes. We're going to put a big tree trunk in front of that, so it doesn't matter too much, but let's put it in there anyway. Again, they're really loose at this stage. You don't have to be overly defined, but it is then important to put it down to maybe 2%. Go back in there, define some of those edges afterwards a little bit more distinctly. And then obviously we have the ability to go in with a highlight, so the 10th color once more. And not all of this is going to be in the direct sun, but some of it will be. And we're still at the 50% strength. 1% size even would be a good idea. So the sun is just hitting it along one edge more. But you could scribble in sections and then have some bits that fragment away. Again, just highlight that side for many of these stones, these shapes. Zoom out, just check how it's impacting. Turn the opacity down if you're not sure, 20%. Highlight some of these, not all of them. Some of them are going to be quite happy to sort of disappear in the background a little bit more in the shade, in the shadow. Sun doesn't need to be evenly distributed. Again, go to the second color on the middle row. And then we've got a bit of a, let's put it up, 3% size, 40% strength. And we can just cool that off at the bottom edge. I'm going to have maybe a sense of water down here anyway. So something like this. I'm then going to create a new layer, layer 10. We'll go in with the organic rainforest brush, 1% size, 70% strength. We'll go in perhaps with the 5th color on the bottom row. And then just between some of these rocks, some of these gaps, we're going to get flattened out areas where some of this foliage is just going to settle. Perhaps we'll just turn it even further down, 50%. We can have some of it just settling back there, any flat areas. And we can bring it over here too, anywhere where there's a flattening out. We could also bring that onto the path. Perhaps turn it up on the strength, 80%, getting closer to us. We don't want it to be too subtle. That's starting to work. And then we'll go to an even brighter color. So we'll go for the 7th color, much brighter. And then anywhere where the sun is just catching the stones, it's going to presumably catch any of the leaves as well. Do little bits of it in here, but not too much. It's catching the stones, so it should catch the leaves too. Just a hint of it. Turn it down perhaps, 1%. Maybe go for the 6th color. Maybe some of that orange, catching the light a little bit there in the background. Just be careful of the posts. We don't want to interfere with them. If we have done, we can always go in and just erase them where they seem to just not make as much sense. So we can go in with the eraser, put the eraser to the medium hard brush, for example. 100% opacity in a small size, and just tidy up anything that seems too anomalous. Shouldn't interrupt and interfere. That's starting to pull together. So we'll go to our top layer, create a new layer, layer 11. So we'll go in again with the drawing evolve brush, and we're going to go to this first color on the bottom row, 10% size, 100% opacity, and then I'm just going to bring in this really nice dark red, rich red-brown color initially. Just tap that in a little bit on this side, some down here, just tap it in, bit of separation. Go to the second color, on the bottom row. Again, just tap in a bit more variation in addition to that. Just a bit more. Then perhaps we can go in with the inking studio pen. We'll go to maybe the 10th color on the bottom row, 20% size, 100% opacity, and then in and amongst all of that, we can just start adding some branches, and yeah, we can be clever in the way that we do it. We'll just press lightly initially, and then we can bring little branches in, bring it through, let it go behind some of the blobs that we've created, and it just instantly sets it in there in a way that is quite nice, quite effective. Some of it can just cut all the way in front, and that's fine too. Something like this. Then we can go to a lighter color, maybe the 9th color, turn that strength down to 30% or so, and then in fact even that is too strong, so we'll put it all the way down to maybe 15%. Then we can just twist in some of this lighter tone where it feels appropriate. Don't need to do too much of that, just a hint of it here and there is enough. Back to the drawing, evolve brush, back in with a brighter color, so perhaps we'll go to the 4th color on the bottom row, and well, we need an appropriate size, don't we? So let's put that down to 3%, 100% opacity, and then we can just add in some highlights of this. Again, we don't need to do too much. Perhaps we could create a new layer, but put it underneath. Let's grab it, put it underneath layer 11. Go in with the evolve brush, go in with a really light color, so the 4th color, 4% size, maybe 70% strength, and then this color can go behind perhaps. We want some really nice variation, different layers. And that can work really nicely. I'm going to go for this side, so we're going to add some really big tree trunks in here. So we'll go to the top layer, create a new layer, layer 13. We'll go in with that 10th color on the bottom row. Go in with the airbrushing medium hard brush, put it to 10% size, 100% opacity. I'm just going to bring in a really bold tree trunk initially. Cuts through, make it even bigger and bolder. Something like this. Turn that down 5%. Maybe there's another branch that comes in here. Maybe this branches off. Turn it down again, 2%, and on we go. I'm going to tap on that layer, put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with some lighter colors, so we'll go for the 9th color on the bottom row. We'll go in with the medium hard brush still, but I'm going to put it all the way down to maybe 15% strength, maybe 3% size, 2% size, and just start to create some sections in here. Run along the extent of the tree, create some bark, variation in tone. Whoops, that's a bit bold. So I'm pressing lightly, although it's at quite a low percentage, it is possible to really go in there and get too bright with it. So just be mindful. We don't want too much. Build it up a bit more gradually than that. Tap in some texture as well. Maybe go to a lighter color. Maybe some areas we can just go over a few times. Really want the sun, perhaps just to dapple through here and there. Not consistent. I'm going to put this up to 100%. I definitely want the sun to dapple through here and there, but like I say, not consistently. It doesn't need to be all over at all. But just having it in 1 or 2 places is really pretty effective. I'm going to create a layer on top of that, and I'm also going to change to maybe the 5th color. I'm going to go in with the drawing, evolve brush, put it to 10% size, 100% opacity, and I'm just going to create some foliage that just cuts in front of that. I want it to be quite dramatic. Doesn't need to be overly fussed over at all. I quite like the impact that that has. Go back to layer 11, and perhaps we'll just continue some of that foliage underneath here as well. Go in with maybe an even brighter color, maybe the 7th color. Maybe some of that lightness can just peek through from the background areas. We don't want to lose out on some of that real bright sunshine. That is quite bright, so maybe we'll go back one to the 6th color. Have some of those oranges coming through behind the tree in areas we don't want to have no sunlight coming through. We've got tons of sunlight through hitting the little roof of our structure, so we need it in other places too. Then perhaps we'll go to the organic rainforest brush, maybe stay on layer 11. We'll put it to 3% size, 80% strength, and we'll have some foliage, different things that are just along the edge here. Perhaps we could try an even dark color, maybe the 3rd color, just as a base color. Run that along here and somewhat along this side, behind the tree, along here. Perhaps we go for an even more muted color, the 5th color. Mix it all in. We want some really nice variation of tones. I think it's important. Now, along this path, where were we? We were layer 5. I'm going to go back to that layer. I'm going to go to the 10th color. I'm going to go back in with maybe the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put it to 3% size, 30% strength, and well, I'm just going to ramp up the sun now at this point. So we've got sunlight in various different areas, but I want to ramp this up. I'm going to go to 2% size actually. That section, I want some real sunlight coming through here. And then I really want to ramp up the sun along this path. And it's just magically kind of bringing it to life. I really like this effect. I think that works really quite nicely. Bring some of the sun in here. Bring it further towards us. I want large parts of that path sunlit, so let's go 4%. And we'll take it really close to us. Don't necessarily want all of it sunlit. I want to introduce some shadow in there as well, perhaps here in the foreground. So let's go backwards on that. We'll go to the 1st color on the middle row. We'll go back in perhaps with the organic rainforest brush, 5% size, 100% opacity, and then just sense of shadow in here as well. Again, just interrupting that dappled light, tree or trees that are slightly off. We don't know where, just obscuring some of the light in there as well, creating some variation. Shut down that bottom section perhaps. We can alternate. We can go back in with the brightest of colors, so maybe the 10th color top row. Bring some of that sunlight through into this section. I mean, it does seem very bright, that, and that's fine. Maybe we can go for a slightly more muted. We go for the 7th color. And we can just temper that a little bit along that path. But we definitely don't want to lose the light, so 10th color. And we're just sort of balancing between the two, really, I suppose. Perhaps I'll go back to layer 4 that it was based on. And then still with the rainforest brush, still with the 10th color on the top row, but turn it down, 50% strength, 3% size, and I can just go in there and really just reduce some of the gaps in that path. I think they can be a little bit bold. We don't want them to be too overwhelming. Let's just reduce them a little bit. Although we're going to have some of that shadow, we don't want it to be so dramatic that it's just over the top. That's working and pulling together quite nicely. We need to add more leaves. So let's go to the very top, layer 14. We'll go in, still with the rainforest brush. We'll go in with a nice shadow kind of leaf color. So the 8th color, put it to 100%. And we've got a nice color. We'll add some of these leaves on the ground. And this is a really good way of just obscuring that path in places. If you're not 100% happy with it anyway, then it's a good way of just getting rid of some of that problem. We'll just have that path and the side just littered with leaves. Why not? And then we can tap on that layer, put on the alpha lock, and we can go to a really bright color now. Go to the 7th color. And then when it's in the sun, those leaves are just going to really light up. So we're getting a real combination of the leaves in the sun being a certain way, and then when they're in the shadow, they kind of change quality. It's a really neat trick to be able to just exaggerate the sense of sun. We can also go to, where were we? Layer 11, tap on that and put on the alpha lock and do exactly the same thing. The bits at the side of the path, not all of it, but just bits of it. And again, that's just bringing that more together. I'm going to go to the roof, a little structure, tap on that and put on the alpha lock. Again, I'm going to go for shadow color we had, the 5th color. And I just want to add bits of shadow in here, turn it down, blot out little sections. Probably need to go back in and just redefine some of those other bits too. So let's go in with the fourth color, go in with the airbrushing soft brush. That will do 1% size, 30% strength or so, and just, yeah, redefine some of these separations too. Although we're adding shadow, we don't want to lose definition of some of these areas. So just go back in and do that. If you want to add this dappled shadow, don't want to lose everything. Now we've just got this side and that side to address slightly. I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to go to layer 3 and create a layer above that, layer 15. I'm going to go in with the second color on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium brush, 4% size, 20% strength, and I'm just going to create some bands. So we're going to have just a suggestion of water in there, but I'm really not going to spell it out too much. Just some bands, just to mildly, lightly suggest that. Go to the first color on that middle row, 2% size, 6%, 5%, whatever. And then we just create a hint of a reflection of these stones. But again, I'm not really going into any great detail on that. And then a couple of last details. I'm going to go to the very top, create a new layer, go to my brushes, organic, snow gum brush. Now I've tapped on it and I put the spacing at, well, it's 50%. I'm going to go on the color dynamics and put the hue to none and the darkness to none. Click done. I'm going to go in with a nice vibrant color, so maybe the 6th color on the middle row, and just create some leaves that are just in our scene, and then turn it down, get some smaller ones in the background there. Try to not go over the tree trunk. The big ones in the foreground, small ones in the background, don't forget. 7th color, just catch the light a little bit more back here. You can just really go to town with this. If you want to make sure that it goes underneath the tree trunk, then just drag it down underneath layer 13. And you don't have to worry as much. And just pepper in a bit more of it. You don't want to do too much though. Just on that path, I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, 10th color on the middle row. Just need to define 1 or 2 of those stones. 2% size, 60% strength. I feel like they need just to be a little clearer, a little bolder. I think that they've just got a little bit muddied. And that happens sometimes. But it's easy enough to go in and just remedy that. Make them a little bit crisper, a little bit clearer. Okay, I'm going to leave this at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Don't forget to hit subscribe. I will put a link in the comments section in a couple of days to the extended version over at my Patreon page. Otherwise, I hope to catch you back here soon. Bye for now.